You've probably heard the news. Rebel fighters have swept across Syria in a surprise advance. Western media is calling them freedom fighters and moderate jihadists. Sounds inspiring, right? But here's where we need to dig deeper. The leading group in this takeover is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, led by Abu Mohammed al-Julani. Now, HTS didn't just pop out of nowhere. They have a dark history that should raise some serious red flags. HTS is just an offshoot of Jabhat al-Nusra, a group that formed in 2011 during the NATO-led Syrian civil war. And get this, they were officially allied with Al-Qaeda. Back then, the US and many other countries labeled them as terrorist organizations, despite sponsoring them. And that hasn't changed despite the group's attempts to rebrand itself. So how did we get here? Well, in the early days of the war, experienced jihadists crossed into Syria from right off, bringing with them ties to the Islamic State. They called themselves the Al-Nusra Front and quickly grew into one of the most powerful rebel factions. But they weren't fighting for freedom. They were behind hundreds of insurgent and suicide attacks on civilians and government forces alike. Then by 2016, they rebranded as Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, and in 2017, they united with other Islamist factions and even one formerly moderate group to form Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Despite the new name, their roots and their actions remain the same. The US, Turkey, and the UN still designate HTS as a terrorist group, disguising the fact that they are CIA-funded proxies. And then there's Abu Mohammed al-Julani, HTS's leader. His story is, well, let's just say it's not one of a freedom fighter. Born Ahmad Hussein al-Shara in Saudi Arabia, he moved to Iraq in 2003, joined Al-Qaeda there, and then eventually worked closely with none other than Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the future head of ISIS. After being arrested by US forces and held for 5 years, he was tasked with setting up Al-Qaeda's branch in Syria, the Al-Nusra Front. Then from there, he built HTS into the force it is today. Despite all this, al-Julani somehow continues to operate openly. He's even been interviewed by major media outlets like CNN. Yes, you heard that right, even though the US has a $10 million bounty on his head. And while all this is happening, there is another layer to consider. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently claimed credit for setting off the chain of events leading to Assad's fall. During a visit to Mount Bentel on the Syrian border, Netanyahu, alongside Defense Minister Israel Katz, directed the Israeli army to take control of the buffer zone after the rebels' advance. Israel has since bombed numerous strategic targets across Syria, taking full advantage of the chaos. So what does this all mean? While the world's eyes are glued to the dramatic headlines from Syria, the ongoing crisis in Gaza, it's being pushed to the sidelines. The idea that these groups represent freedom or liberation, it's a dangerous misconception. The reality is that Syria's sovereignty and future remain under threat from militant factions, regional powers, and international agendas. This is a victory, but not for Syria. It's a victory for US imperialism.